Well, good afternoon, everyone. For those I've not had a chance to meet this afternoon, my name is John Highbush. I'm the Executive Director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. And I want to thank all of you for being here on the eve of Memorial Day weekend. Before we get started with today's program, I'd like to take a moment to share President Reagan's words from 1981 in honor of Memorial Day. President Reagan said, "Over 100 years ago, Memorial Day was established to commemorate those who died in the defense of our national ideals. Our ideals of freedom, justice, and equal rights for all have been challenged many times since then. And thousands of Americans have given their lives in many parts of the world to secure those same ideals and ensure for their children a lasting peace. Their sacrifice demands that we, the living, continue to promote the cause of peace and the ideals for which they so valiantly gave of themselves." What I'd like you to do is please join me now in a moment of silence for those who have died, in the words of Ronald Reagan, in the defense of our national ideals. Thank you. Now I'd like to take a moment to recognize some special guests that we have with us today. First, this exhibit that you are about to see was made possible by the Auto Club of Southern California. And representing their CEO, Tom McKernan, tonight is their Vice President, Mr. Galen Eicher. Galen, there you are. Galen, thank you so much. Although he is not here, I'd also like to give a special thank you to Mike Curb. Some of you may know Mike, the former Lieutenant Governor of California. Over half of the cars displayed in this exceptional exhibit are from his private collection. And I'd also like to give thanks to the exhibit's other sponsors, which include Hendrick Motorsports, Richard Woodland of the Estrella Warbirds Museum, and of course to the famous Lynn St James. I know Lynn is out there. Lastly, I'd like to give a special thank you to the curatorial team that put this exhibit together, led by the library's director, Duke Blackwood, as well as Andrew Wolf and Rob Zuka. Duke and Rob, thank you, Duke, and Rob. Now, in the 1930s, as part of his job as a young radio announcer, Ronald Dutch Reagan was calling auto races. And in 1984, President Ronald Reagan became the first sitting U.S. president to attend a NASCAR race. That July, he started the Firecracker 400 at Daytona International Speedway, where he gave the command, "Gentlemen, start your engines," from aboard Air Force One. And later that day, Air Force One landed at Daytona International Airport behind the Speedway in full view of the fans. It was at that race that Richard Petty captured his historic 200th victory. So in honor of President Reagan's relationship and fascination with auto racing, we are proud to bring you this new exhibit. It features a wide array of storied vehicles from the history of American auto racing. Visitors will view fire suits and trophies and helmets and gloves and, of course, historic cars which were driven by legends such as Dale Earnhardt Sr., Richard Petty, as well as cars driven by current racers from Kurt Busch to Jimmy Johnson and Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Austin Dillon, who will make his NASCAR Sprint Cup Series debut later this year. Now, this exhibit also houses the 1989 Ford Thunderbird Super Coupe, driven by today's special speaker, Lynn St James. It was in this car that Lynn set 31 national and international speed records on a closed course at Talladega Speedway, becoming the first woman to exceed 200 miles per hour on an oval track. Not only was she also a 7-time Indy 500 racer, but in 1992, she was named Indianapolis 500 Rookie of the Year, the first time a woman ever won that title. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our honoree, Lynn St James.
Well, thank you very much. It is truly an honor to be here. It is an unbelievable experience, actually. I remember watching, as we probably many of us did, the funeral of services that took place here, and you know, Ronald Reagan, I actually was also very, very honored to have the opportunity to meet. In fact, I got to have a private tour with Joanne earlier when we got here, and she took us into the replica, I guess, or the Oval Office, and I said, I remember that because I was in the Oval Office and got to meet Ronald Reagan, and I think I passed the test because I recognized the carpet. So she was like, yeah, you were okay. But, and so when I met Garrett and a few other people earlier this year, that they talked about the fact that they were going to be doing this American Racing exhibit at the Reagan Museum, the Reagan Library, and then I was like, you know, I was trying to figure out what the connection might be, other than the one that I knew, which I happened to remember watching on television when Reagan did do the "Gentlemen, Start Your Engines" from Air Force One. The only thing I wished he had been able to say at that time was, "Lady and gentlemen, start your engines," but you know, that wasn't happening yet. So I remember that, and I remember that really the significance for me was the fact that the President of the United States actually loved my sport, loved the same sport that I was passionate about, because most people in high offices, or whether it's in political offices or corporate offices, you know, everybody likes golf, they have their tennis, they have their, you know, football, they have their basketball, and they have their baseball, but, you know, racing has not always been that kind of a high profile with someone like that. So it was just really, really cool. And then to be able to tell him that, because when I went there in the White House after that, I was there in honor of National Girls and Women in Sport Day, which is held every year, and we have a chance to go to the White House, but that was the first time. At that time, I was president of the Women's Sports Foundation, and I was able to actually tell him that, and tell him that I remember, you know, hearing that and how important that was, that because I knew that he loved the sport. So then to be able to kind of come full circle and not only have my car here, but then to be able to come and speak and represent motorsports, because there's this kind of a busy weekend in racing. So I just flew in, and I'm flying right back to Indianapolis first thing tomorrow morning. But this was so important. I had to be here, and it's, as I said, it's truly an honor. I started trying to figure out what I was going to say, and I can't speak that I'm a Reagan expert. I mean, I was just a person growing up and living out there in society just like all of us were, and amazed at what he was able to accomplish. But first was thinking about the expected and the unexpected, you know, and the unexpected fact that an actor who then went into politics, who then became the President of the United States, how that was just unexpected. That was not the traditional. And then, of course, when people meet me, I mean, sometimes when people meet me, they go, well, you're not a race car driver. I mean, you know, and I'm like, well, they say you're not big enough, you don't look tough enough. I'm like, I said, I'm not Brunhilde, I don't carry the car, I just drive it, you know. And you know, and it's just like it's the unexpected, you know, and so, but I thought that's a little corny probably to try to make that connection, but so I thought I would just share with you a little bit of my background because it was unexpected from the very beginning. People say, well, how did you get involved in racing? And I said, well, I like to drive fast, and simply put, that was it. And I was getting a lot of tickets. And so I found out a legal, safe place to do this was at a racetrack, and that people, real people drove race cars. They were not superhumans like Mario Andretti and A.J. Foyt. I mean, they were like that, but they weren't the only ones. And I remember going to the Indianapolis 500 my first time as a fan, as a very young teenager in 1966. But I don't think I ever said, oh, I'm going to do that, because I wasn't even allowed in Gasoline Alley, because women were not allowed in Gasoline Alley at that time. But I just thought I'd never seen anything so much more spectacular than the sound of those engines and the speed that they were going by. And I mean, it was just the smell, everything about it, you know, absolutely resonated with me. And so, you know, I became a fan first. I went to a girls' school in the 60s. I was fortunate to do that, because if I hadn't, it was pre-Title IX. The only sport they offered to girls in the public schools at that time was cheerleading, and I can tell you I'm not the cheerleading type either. So, you know, I wouldn't have fit there, but because I went to a girls' school, I got to have sports. I was taught to be an independent, self-sufficient young lady. And young lady maybe didn't fit their criteria to go on to become a race car driver, but I took piano lessons for 13 years. I actually became a piano teacher for a while, a very short while. It's the only job I was ever fired from, so it's good to find out what you're not good at. But I always had this drive to want to go fast. I'm the designated driver as a kid, even, that was always me behind the wheel driving on road trips. So racing was, or driving, it was what I loved to do, and racing when I found out what real people did this, so I became a member of the Sports Car Club of America, went out and got my competition license by going to driving school in my very first race car, which was a Ford Pinto. I started at the very bottom of the ladder. It was my street car. I drove it back and forth during the week to work on weekends, and then put a roll bar in it, a 5-point seatbelt, a 5-pound fire extinguisher, which was required for all race cars and not just Pintos. And if you remember the story of the Pinto. But fortunately, I won races in that Pinto. I was able to win some races and some championships. And of course, when you start winning, you start to develop confidence. When you have that confidence, you want a faster car. And ultimately ended up getting Ford Motor Company as a sponsor in 1981 after reading an article in Car and Driver magazine entitled Ford and Feminism. And it talked about how Ford wanted to provide opportunities for women in non-traditional areas. And I said, if I win on Sunday, people will buy Fords on Monday, and they'll hire more women in non-traditional areas. And they said no, but I kept bugging them, and I think they finally said, the only way we're going to get rid of her is if we hire her. So I ended up getting that contract and went on to win races professionally in sports cars and in IMSA. As always, as I said, you start to win, you develop more confidence. I wanted to go faster, and I always dreamed about the opportunity to be able to drive an Indy car. But Indy cars in that time, Ford wasn't in Indy car racing. They were in stock car racing and NASCAR. And that's what led me to be able to then take that Thunderbird that you're going to see in this exhibit. It is the car as it came off the track, so it's got dings in it and it's got some race tape holding it together. But I convinced Bill Elliott, who had co-drove and won the 24 Hours of Daytona with, I said, if Ford will build the car, would you guys prepare it? Because he had a family owned the team. That way he got a 1989 body, a new, that he could test. He goes, yeah, I like that idea. And I said to Ford, hey, if the Elliots build this car, you'll have some advanced, technology that you'll learn when you take this to the wind tunnel. Yeah, we kind of like that idea. So then I went to Goodyear and I said, well, if Ford and the Elliots do this, so it was one of these sales deals. I got everybody lined up. And I was able to get the car built and took the car to Talladega and went average speed of 214 miles an hour. We were about 2 or 3/10 of a second or a mile an hour slower than Bill Elliott. And then the engine blew up. And Ernie, his brother, built the engine. They said there was a button, and he must have said, oh, she's getting ready to beat Bill's record, boom. So anyway, we got close, though. And it was a fantastic experience, but Ford was not interested in putting me into stock cars at that time. And 3 weeks later, I had the opportunity, because of a gentleman who was going to try to get here tonight because he lives in California, Dick Simon. And he owned Indy cars, and I wanted to drive an Indy car. He gave me that opportunity 3 weeks later. I fell in love with an Indy car, and I did really well. And 4 years later, after 151 companies said no, 150 companies said no, the 151st company, JCPenney, said yes, they would sponsor us. And I got to go to the Indianapolis 500 in 1992. I still hold the record out of 732 drivers that have ever raced in the Indianapolis 500, and as you know, they are celebrating also their centennial this year. So after 100 years of competition at the Indianapolis 500, there are only 732 human beings that have ever been in that race. There are 269 of them still living. There are going to be over 100 of them back this weekend in Indianapolis. And I still hold the record. Now, 732 had to be a rookie at one time, because you're a rookie the first time you go there, okay? So there's 732 who were rookies at one time. And I still hold the record for being the oldest rookie in the history of the Indianapolis 500. I wasn't so proud of that back then, but I really am proud of that now. So I kind of felt that Reagan and I, because I think he was one of the oldest presidents, I read. So I thought, well, that's something we had in common. So we were doing the unexpected. And I went on to, not only win Rookie of the Year, but then, as John mentioned, I went on to run 7 Indy 500s over the course of 9 years, 15 IndyCar races. And I'm probably now most proud of the fact that I've been able to mentor young up-and-coming drivers. Danica Patrick I started working with her when she was 14. I started working with Sarah Fisher when she was 15. We created a driver development program that so many fans sent me letters wanting advice, and I said I can't just send them an autograph. And so I created a whole program 17 years ago and have been training over 300 young up-and-coming drivers from 38 states and 5 countries. And so I guess besides the honor of actually being able to be here and speak to you for a few minutes and be able to share my car with you and some of my experiences and be able to have the honor of being here, I'm also very excited and very proud that there are 4 women that are capable of winning the Indianapolis 500 in the race this year. Out of 33 drivers, that's progress. So it took a while, but we're there. So I'm very proud to represent motorsports because I know everybody's pretty busy in Charlotte and Indianapolis right now. I get to drive a 1911 Buick on Sunday as part of the parade laps. And so the older you get, the more you respect history. I've certainly learned that. And it's just an honor to be a part of that history, and it's definitely an honor to be here. So thank you very much for inviting me and having me. Thank you.
She terrific or what? One more round of applause for Lynn. Thank you. Thanks so much, Lynn. Well, in 10 minutes, you're going to have a chance to see this absolutely spectacular exhibit. So just please enjoy yourself, and then you'll hear from us in 10, and you can head on in and see this great new exhibit. Thanks so much for coming.